Hi, and welcome to episode 42 of the ChessTDD series. And sorry, don't mind my neighbors rudely honking. Time to take on this problem where I've only, pretty much coded for the white pawn all along. So you saw me in Trello there parenthetically say that I'm a little scared. So let's dive into it. I was kind of trying to figure out here, how do I tackle this thing? So the first thing I thought I'd do, since I wasn't quite sure what to do, is, well, let's see how bad it is. It's kind of like, going to the doctor when you got like a cut and you've like, slapped a cloth over it or something. I don't know. But I figured I'd go in and I'd write an acceptance test just to say, here's what a black pawn in its starting position should do, and how bad is this going to be, and what do I have to do to get it passing. There's an interesting kind of conundrum here. Like, once you actually have a code base, and this is why I kind of like doing this series instead of like some little thing like a code kata. Once you start to build up a code base and it's a non-trivial implementation, you start to hit this problem where, how do you tackle new functionality like this, writing an acceptance test versus a unit test, and like, what all like parts are going to be affected. So it's not just, a toy application. There are any number of things that could be going wrong here. So it's gonna, probably affect a few different classes and methods and everything. And obviously this isn't like some application that 10 people have been working on for the last few years, but this isn't nothing either. There've been 40 some episodes of this. So writing this acceptance test will be a good point of entry. For me, I have a preference where to kind of, get my bearings, I'm going to write this test and sort of see how far off I am. I'm not going to write any more acceptance tests. What I'm going to do is kind of go into TDD mode here, figuring things out until I can get this acceptance test passing. And that's going to take a while because it isn't just as simple as like, doing the, easiest thing to get it to pass. Might not be very easy, especially with an acceptance test, because it might be that there are a few methods kind of working together in conjunction to create a problem. So as you've seen me do before here, this thing isn't passing as an acceptance test. So I want to see if I can like replicate this in a unit test to focus things a little bit more. And I think what I was doing here was struggling a little, like, okay, what am I going to name this? And now this is a black pawn. So I don't remember if I actually like, I think I started to even go up to the top and maybe have like two different targets or something. And then I realized like, oh, well, what am I doing? This is a whole different context. Like the black pawn, unlike the other pieces that can kind of just, move backwards and forwards, which side's piece they are really only matters in the context of capture, but like for the pawns, because they can only like advance on the board, their whole like movement, their core stuff is kind of like really tied up in whether it's a first player piece or not. So all that kind of made me think like, hey, this is a completely different context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as an opportunity not to keep adding to the old way of doing this test setup. So I'm going to create this new thing that Steve Smith had introduced me to that I've been doing, for the last, 20 episodes or whatever. So I'm gonna bake the context into the class name and say that for a black pawn, get moves from should do the following things. And so now I can have a setup where I'm not going to have like two target, two like versions of the class under test. I don't want like two different instances. That's kind of weird and confusing. What I really want to do is get like a single cohesive setup. And to me, that's what this is all about. And frankly, it's why the suggestion was so appealing to me of how to structure the test this way, like one test class, one kind of setup context. So you want a different setup context, make a different test class. And it's easier to kind of keep things clean and organized that way. And I'm enjoying it. So here, the initialization in the test context is going to be that this is not a first player piece. So we're going to create this pawn that's a black pawn. And we're going to see, how rough it is to fix it so that the black pawn, moves in the other direction. So I remember something that happened here. I was kind of going back and forth and referring to, the pawn test class where I had this set up. Maybe this happened. Well, we'll see. I think this comes later. It's the problem with recording a bunch of these in a row. I'm getting a little bit clever here. So yeah, it's not this one. It's a future class I create. Anyway, sorry about that. This is fairly straightforward. So I've defined, just like I did in that pawn class, I'm going to define this enumerable of board coordinates, and I'm going to get the moves from 6-2, which actually turns out to be wrong. I had to take a couple of passes at this before I realized that I didn't want to. So at 6-2, you'd have a white pawn that was in front of the white bishop. I was transposing the coordinates, and it wasn't 6 I wanted anyway. It was 7. So this was just a whole mountain of fail. I realized it right at this moment in writing the method, and I was like, okay, let me go and just fix this real quick, but I don't want to do a rename because then I'll lose my highlighted name here. So I'll be smart and I'll just rename it the right thing here. But then I wasn't smart. So it's moves from 6-2 up there, and then I fixed it on the fly, and it's moves from 2-6, except it should be 2-7, and then finally, yeah, I mean, that's pretty embarrassing. But that's the nature of this whole experiment. I routinely do embarrassing things in the code. Said it over and over again. That'll pretty much never go away unless you're some kind of, super being. So you might as well just kind of accept that you're going to do a lot of dumb things and not try to avoid it. I've made a decent, living and name and all that for myself, even in spite of doing dumb things on a pretty regular basis. So anyway, enough with the philosophical self-deprecation, I guess. What I did there, that's an interesting lesson to catch. So I'd written this test and said well, we want to see a move. If the black pawn is at 2-7, we want to see it get to 2-6, and that failed. And I went ahead and confirmed a suspicion I had real quick right there, which is oh, well, if this were a white pawn, it would yield the move 2-8. So I changed the 6 to an 8 and verified. There was a little experiment I ran. I made a hypothesis and ran an experiment and verified it. So I didn't leave that as a test because I don't want it to be true, but that's a thing you can do. If you have occasion, you can write a failing test and kind of tweak it a little to confirm your understanding of the code base. By all means, do that. So I confirmed that understanding and said, yep, sure enough, this is failing because it's treating that particular pawn as if it were a white pawn. So what I want to do now to get that to pass is I want to say, okay, let's just have this conditional where if, I'm going to have this whole other block of code for the black pawn, and I'm just going to start out here and I'm going to say, all right, let's return a board coordinate, that's -1 for the y instead of +1. Now, what happened was I made the TDD test pass, but it is not making that acceptance test pass. And so the obvious thing here is oh, well, the acceptance test, it wants not only this move that's 1 fewer than the starting location of the black pawn on the vertical axis, but 2. So what should I do? Should I write another unit test to drive that? Or should I get this acceptance test to red? What I decided to do, get the acceptance test to green. I decided I wanted to get the acceptance test to green. What I just did there sure should have gotten it to green, but then it didn't, so I was confused. Why didn't that work? If you're following along and you know why it didn't work, I'd be pretty impressed. You'd have a better memory of this code base than I do, and I'm the one writing it. As it turns out, the reason that this is failing is not immediately obvious. It's subtle. And it's not the kind of thing that you've seen before here with me where, oh, I did something wrong in the test logic, or it's not something dumb. And so what I'm doing here is I don't really want to get back in the debugger, so I'm kind of trying to test some hypotheses and run experiments again. So oh, well, it's telling me I'm getting 0 results there. What if I comment out one of these? Is it inverted somehow? If I comment out 1, will I get 1 result? No, it's still 0. And, I think Next thing I'm thinking is maybe if I change this to a white pawn, that will like make a difference, possibly, perhaps, I don't know. So I'm trying. Oh, yeah. The next thing I tried was maybe I should forget about these variables and just like return the pieces or the board coordinates that this acceptance test wants. So, okay, let's just maybe I'm somehow getting the math of starting location dot x and y wrong. So I'll just like explicitly return, 1, 6, and 1, 5. And hey, now I'm starting to suspect that there's like a deeper problem because that's like weird. All right. I am like literally returning those two things that this is expecting, and it's still not working. So this is where I tried the white pawn. Okay, now I'm getting 1. But for the black pawn, I'm still getting nothing. So what's going on there? And it was at this point I started to think about like, well, okay, I'm going to reluctantly step into the debugger. It's not like a matter of just purism. Like I really like to avoid the debugger because if I can be reasoning about the code, the way it's written and the way it's working at compile time, like I don't like needing to run the application to understand what my code is doing. That's a source of trouble for me. And again, that's also not purism. If I need to run the code to understand what's going on, that's kind of a piece of pain that I'm feeling. And instead of just saying like, well, okay, I'll just get really good at the debugger, I'm going to let that pain drive me to perhaps like simplify the design or, at least I'm going to leave the pain there instead of like anesthetizing it. So this is maybe a part of the code that's a little too complex or something. Now, having said that, the idea that you would never need to use the debugger, I certainly wouldn't say that. I mean, you see me do it. I just try not to make it my like default tool, and I certainly never do things like edit and continue and get like crazy good at the debugger. I would much rather keep myself good at writing tests that sort of confirm or disprove hypotheses that I have. So back to what's going on here. Now, this is interesting. So yeah, that's right. The board is going to get all the moves from, and it's going to query the pieces about like what moves they have available. And then it's going to make, at the board level determinations about what moves are legal and what moves aren't legal. Aha. So it's not so much that like get moves from is doing anything wrong. I seem to be returning the right moves. Those unit tests make sense. It's that the interplay here, there are moves being flagged as illegal. Now, this is another thing. I mentioned this in the last episode, and I'm seeing it again as a symptom of what I was talking about. So I'm calling get moves from, and I've implemented in pawn, I've said, all right, here are the moves that the pawn has. But then also in pawn, I have this concept of is this a valid capture move or is this a valid non-capture move? And the duplication of that knowledge is what's biting me here. And I didn't even realize this really as I was doing it. I didn't think about it. So it seems like if I were, using get moves from for like, capture and non-capture and then sort of winnowing it down, I wouldn't be having this problem maybe. So it's just something to keep in mind for later. It's a design subtlety. It's something that maybe should get addressed. But again, I'm favoring shipping here. I want to try to get like a correct version of this where, we have lots of acceptance tests that are passing and you might feel comfortable about using it. And then, there always may be bugs, but I don't want to bike shed over the design anymore for, number one, if I were running a team, I would sort of recommend like, we've been at this for a while. We've got a base that we can work with. So maybe, we should get something out to our users. And also number two, just from a personal perspective, like this has been a project I've been doing for like over a year, very, very part-time, but still, I kind of like to, defeat this thing, so to speak. So I want to get it to a point where maybe I can wrap up the series and then do like, an add-on or bonus, or maybe even like productize it and say, okay, well, here's how I'd go back in and like really revisit the design and make this as clean as possible. So anyway, I had finally gotten it figured out that like, okay, so I can't just get moves from be correct in order for the acceptance test to work. I also need to be in here figuring out the proper thing to do for capture and non-capture. And in this case specifically, because all the moves in this particular acceptance test are non-capture moves, I need to start getting into a little more detail with how this non-capture works for the black pieces as well. So that's, it's a good marker to put down to say, here's the acceptance test we need to pass. Acceptance test-driven development is a great way to approach things. One of the drawbacks you see is compared to, say, always being at the unit level is that, like, okay, so I've got this red acceptance test, and it's going to stay red for a while because I have to do, like, two different pieces of TDD on two different methods and then make sure they're working properly together. And the thing that I struggle with personally is that this, it feels like a long time to stay red. But, I get through it. So I'm designing yet another class here to do some TDD, and now I want to go and drive out with TDD what the problem that I'm having is. And so I am going back and referring to this last class I wrote, and if you recall, I was sort of getting ready to chide myself for this duplication thing. So I wanted to go and copy and paste moves from 2.7, but I resisted the impulse. I was good. I'm not being a hypocrite. Everything's great, right? Yeah, so as it turns out, what I actually want to do here is in capture allowed, I'm not like getting moves from anywhere, so I'm just passing a coordinate to that method. I'm getting a Boolean back, not a collection of moves. So, oh yeah, moves, wait a minute, I'm going to set that equal to a Boolean. Crap. Why was I just blindly copying what I had in this other class? That doesn't like make a lot of sense. So I kind of made a note here in the comments to myself to say like, see, I think that's why you don't copy and paste or something. But really what I should have typed was, that's why you don't just like, blindly duplicate. So it doesn't, if I'm just blindly duplicating things, it doesn't matter if I hand type it or if I copy and paste. Copy and paste is just, being dumb faster. And it's not that I actually blame myself. If you were sitting next to me and you did that, I wouldn't be like, man, you're an idiot. But it's, there's lessons to be taken away. And I, in each blog post, I kind of highlight those lessons. And this is one, which is like, the danger isn't necessarily hitting Control V. The danger comes when you kind of get into a comfortable rhythm and you're just sort of doing things without thinking. Like if you're like, okay, I'm going to make another one of these classes, I'm going to grab all the setup from this last class, like that. Every time that's happening, one of two things should be going through your mind, or maybe both. Like, okay, so if it's kind of brainless and I can just like copy this test setup over and over again and tweak it a little bit, whether I'm doing copy and paste or not, like maybe there's a design thing I can do a little better. Or the other thing is like, am I just blindly repeating something that's not like applicable anymore, which is what happened here. So having straightened all that out, now I've finally got a unit test in place that's exposing the bug that I wanted to expose, which is, okay, so is capture allowed? Oh no, I want is non-capture allowed. That's right. I was like, man, I misspoke earlier. But nevertheless, I'm still red, which is, hey, look, so this makes sense. Is non-capture allowed is always, is vertical move by 1. And what I really want to do is see, is vertical move by -1 for the black piece. So what I'm going to do is go back here again, and I'm going to have another instance, and I'm starting to smell something here, but I'm saying, okay, if this is a first player piece, then, do all the stuff that's here. Now, if it's not a first player piece, do this whole like other, tree of logic. I have that in 2 methods. If you find yourself with that, like, with that pattern happening, that's a smell. If you have a class and in like every method of that class, you're like, if such and such do this one thing, otherwise do this other thing. If you're doing that over and over again, what you have should probably be 2 classes. And I think I make a Trello card to that effect here later to say like, I'm okay, like this is, so, in every one of these methods, am I going to say like, okay, well, do this one set of things if it's a black piece and do this other set of things if it's a white piece. One other thing to point out here, another kind of lesson to take away is I started again sort of duplicating like, oh, well, I know what's going to happen here. So if it's, if it's a black piece, then replace all the ones with negative ones. So I did all that. And then I saw like, hey, I got this non-covered line. Oh, yeah, don't do that. I have code I don't need yet. That's oops. Don't let that happen. So I went and made a purposeful effort to delete that code. And I was adding code that was not making any test pass. It doesn't need to be there. So what I need to do is go in and write the test that mandates that code. And that's not purism, because like what happens if I say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to need that code. And then maybe I go back and I say like, okay, well, I'm not going to add it yet. I'm going to write the test that makes me add it. Maybe I start writing that test and I'm like, wait, I don't actually, want the application to do this, or I don't have a need for this. That's the reason you do that. You need a test that's articulating a shortcoming of the code. If you can't articulate a shortcoming of the code, why on earth would you add code? Don't add pointless code to your code base. It's like maintenance craft. So anyway, I got to a little over 20 minutes here and I wanted to put a fork in it. So we had a start here, and it was at this point I started to think, man, this is going to take like 3 or 4 episodes. So there was a start on getting things implemented for the black pawn. We had this first acceptance test passing, so that's good. The basics are there, and I'll call it an episode and see you next time.